Good afternoon. Please welcome to the stage the Chief Operating Officer of the Points of Light Foundation, Diane Quest.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for the applause, but I'm going to ask for it one more time. Can I get a big round of cheers if you have enjoyed and learned something in the last 2 days? That's awesome. Thank you. It's my pleasure to welcome you to another engaging conversation this afternoon, this Civic Talk on belonging, volunteerism, and civic engagement. I think we all know that belonging is a deeply human experience that really speaks to the fundamental need for social connection and acceptance. In faith communities, belonging can inspire individuals to volunteer, to use their voice, and actively participate in activities that align with their values and beliefs. In this session today, we'll explore the ways that individuals are building bridges by fostering understanding and promoting collaboration and engaging in meaningful civic life. To do that, we have to welcome our panelists. So please help me in welcoming Tong Dannaoui of Hands on Hong Kong, Jenan Mohajir of Interfaith America, and Ben McBride of Empower Initiative. Okay, because you all can do this better than I can, we're going to start by having each of you introduce yourself and your work as it relates to the subject of belonging. So we'll start with Kath.
Thanks, Diane. So my name's Catherine, and I'm the Executive Director of Hands on Hong Kong. And I have the privilege of leading a small team of 12 people, 2 of them are here today with me, who empower everyone in Hong Kong to volunteer. And we do that by running 200 programs a month, mobilizing volunteers to support under-resourced charities. And our vision is for a Hong Kong where no charity serves alone.
Thank you, Kath. Jenan.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. My name's Jenan Mohajir, currently serving as the Vice President of External Affairs at Interfaith America. Interfaith America is a national bridge-building organization that hopes to inspire, equip, and connect leaders and institutions across the country to build the potential of America's diverse democracy. And we do that by working in specific sectors. One of them is in the civic sector with service organizations, many of whom are here in the room today. We also work very closely with college campuses and also work with corporations and other nonprofits as well. So thank you for having us.
Ben?
Hi, Ben McBride, author of Troubling the Water and CEO of Empower Initiative. We're a leadership development organization that works mainly here domestically in the US, also a little bit globally, really supporting private sector, public sector, as well as faith-based groups and nonprofit organizations to think about how they work together better to create cultural and structural belonging strategies that improve the lives and conditions of everyone.
Thank you all for being here. Ben, I think you have a little bit of context that's really going to help us set the stage for this conversation. So the floor is yours.
Certainly. Well, it's really good to be here with us all. And, you know, Dr. King said that love is the only cement that can hold this broken community together. And if I'm commanded to love, I am commanded to restore community, to resist injustice, and to meet the needs of my brothers. And I would say sisters and relatives. I'm gonna help Dr. King out a little bit, right? But I think the challenge that we have in our world as things are changing rapidly is how do we really foster belonging in a world that is changing at the speed that it is? Dr. John Powell at UC Berkeley with the Othering and Belonging Institute talks a lot about what's really happening for us all collectively, not just here in the United States, but around the world, is we are responding to rapid changes around technology and environment, politics, our shared story. And what's happening, because we're social mammals, is it's creating a level of stress for us. And usually the way that we respond to that stress is through breaking. And one of the main ways we break is through othering. We say, you know, whoever we feel are the people that are stressing us out. They don't look like me, they don't love like me, they don't pray like me, they don't work like me, maybe they don't vote like me, and so I'm going to push them outside my circle of human concern. But I think in the call to fostering belonging, the question is, how do I make a different decision, not about the stress that I feel, I can't change the stress, but how can I make a different decision in light of the environment that I have? And life is certainly going to keep giving us moments to make brave decisions. I had one of these moments. This is the community that I moved into 15 years ago in East Oakland. At that time, it was called the Kill Zone. It's the majority of the gun-related homicides in Oakland happened in this neighborhood. And so I moved in with my wife and 3 daughters at the time. This was back in 2008. And on these steps, I had a moment where I came up and there was a brother sitting there on my steps. And so, I told him, hey man, can you get off my steps, right? And he was like, why you always gotta say something about me being on your steps? And I said, because these are my steps, And we would do this back and forth often about why he was sitting on my steps. And then my wife would come home, and then she and I would have a conversation about why he was sitting on the steps. And, in my house, we don't have arguments. We have what we call intense fellowships, right? Some of y'all know about, that, right? So any intense fellowships in the house, right? So we'd have those, and so one day I go out, and, he's back there again. I come home, and I say, hey, man, you're on my steps again. Here we go. We're getting ready to start our thing. And then I paused. And I saw something in him, and I think when he saw me paused, I asked a different question. I said, why are you on my stairs? And when he saw that I was actually making the space, he looked at me and he said, man, no disrespect, I used to live here. And I know you own the house now, and your wife and daughters, y'all are coming in, but my mother has passed. And I come sit here every day when y'all leave because this is the only place I feel like I belong. And here I realized in that moment, 2 black men, one coming in the neighborhood, one born in the neighborhood, our stories were intersecting in a way, and we both were looking for belonging, but the forces and the environment had put us in conflict unless we were willing to make a different choice. We're in experiences like this right now, even when you think about our political climate. The polarization we have in our nation that is making it difficult for us to find ways to bring people together. The Lethal Mass Partisanship Study said in 2019, polling people across the country, that 15% of Republicans said the country would be better if the majority of the Democrats just died. Now, 20% of Democrats said they believe the country would be better if the majority of the Republicans just died. Now, nobody's saying who's killing all these folks, right? Or where all this violence is happening, but somehow we've gotten to a place where a chunk, 1 out of 5 people in our major political parties are saying that the only way they believe that they can belong is if the majority of the others just died. I'm actually going to ask really quick if those who are in this middle section, could you just, if you're physically able and willing, just stand on your feet really quick? Just stand up. I know we're in the dark, but just stand up. Those that are on the left and the right, I want you to look towards the center and realize that what this data point says is that in our story, some of us have begun to say that the only way that I can be safe is if these people, their beauty, their stories, their families just disappear. Thank you. Please take your seat. Let's all take a deep breath in and let that out. So the question is, what do we do in this moment? In the book, I talk about this notion of radical belonging because I believe that belonging is not just about a destination, but it's also about a practice. It's about co-creating with whomever you see as the perceived other to widen the circle of human concern. It means that when we come to problems, we're going to make a different decision than othering and actually make a decision which is bridging and finding ways to widen the circle rather than constrict the circle. But I know in our response to that stress, we say, well, what is it that we do to bridge? How do we do that? But I actually think the wrong first question is what do we need to do? The right first question is who do we need to become? The wrong first question is, what do we need to do? The right first question is, who do we need to become? And how does that becoming inform for us a kind of doing that is currently not within our reach? I know our lives and our societies, the problems of our world are more complex than a quadrant. But one of the things that I try to invite us to recognize is that most of us, when we face a problem, we face it from the back corner of our quadrant, whether that's your racial identity, your gender identity, your religious identity, your political identity. Maybe it's the department you work in, right? We look at the problem and we say, if they would just take the answers that we have in the back corner of our quadrant, we'd be able to solve all the problems around us. Right? If that person just would listen to me and take what it is that I'm saying and apply it, we'd make all of our problems go away. But what we are calling for in belonging, and what I've learned in the practice of belonging, is the solutions never lie in the back corner. They actually lie at the center, where our worldviews are being informed by others' worldviews. And that in every scenario, you have the powerful, those who are setting the conditions, the privileged, those who benefit from the status quo. You have the persecuted. These are people who have some agency to widen the circle, but they're limited for reasons that aren't always clear. And you have the prevented, who usually don't have any agency to widen the circle. And if we lean into this notion that these experiences are in most of our problems, then we can ask ourselves, where might I have power and privilege, and where is there an opportunity for me to share that? And where might I experience persecution and prevention, and there is an opportunity for me to invite folks forward? That we move away from the notion of calling people out and lean into the practice of calling people in. And here's a way just for me to show you that all of this lives inside of us. If I were to talk about our racial history in this country, as a black man, of course I'm going to find myself in the prevented space. But if we talk about gender, I would say as a black man, I'm going to move into the privileged space. And if we talk about the organization that my wife and I founded 10 years ago, I'm going to move into the powerful space because we raised the capital, we hired the folks, we set up the infrastructure. So the reality is, in one body, I embodied power, privilege, and prevention based upon the situation. So the question is, not that there are some good folks and some bad folks. The question is, how can we get good at recognizing in environments the dynamics that are happening so we can work together to widen the circle? We know exclusion is our common enemy. It doesn't get us where we need to be. Inclusion is better, and even equitable inclusion takes another step. But that still is about subsuming other people into stories that were not originally designed for them. Belonging is asking a different question of us. How can we co-create with each other, giving up power and privilege, standing up amidst persecution and prevention so that we can widen the circle of human concern? In every great movement that's happened in the United States of America, and I would argue in most that I've had the privilege to study around the world, this practice has been present. So I close with this. In the Christian story of Jesus of Nazareth, he runs into a man who is ill. The story of the lame man at the gate of Bethesda, he runs into this man who is sick and ill, and the man wants Jesus to heal him. The man tells Jesus, I can't be healed because the waters are not troubled. And he believed that an angel came down to trouble the waters so he could be healed. But in the story, Jesus tells the man that his problem is really in his mind, and that if he would change his mind about his potential, he would find the healing that he needed. I invite us to think about, may we change our minds about each other and this moment and work together to widen the circle of human concern. Thank you.
Ben, thank you.
Thank you.
You set us up very well for this conversation, and we appreciate you. I want to start with a question for Jenan, because Interfaith America recently launched the Shared Table Collaborative, which I think will just kick us off with a shared understanding of what we want to talk about today, which is really getting at solutions that you teed us up for, Ben. So Jenan, if you can tell us about the key objectives and why this initiative was informed and important to you.
Sure, yeah. So Shared Tables is a public service announcement that is encouraging people to come together across deep difference and create inclusive spaces, inclusive tables where they're able to come together around issues of common concern. This PSA is a part of a partnership between the Ad Council and the Team Up Project. And the Team Up Project is a collaboration between Interfaith America, YMCA, Catholic Charities, and Habitat for Humanity International. So we'll tee up that video right now.
Right.
Whether it's our stories, the warmth of our laugh, or our family's secret sauce, we all bring something different to the table. So make some space. The power of connection is waiting right outside your comfort zone. Learn how you can help strengthen your community at belongingbeginswithus.org/teamup.
So this is part of the Ad Council's the larger Belonging Begins With Us campaign, and this is a part of that. And the Team Up Project is a project and a collaboration, as I mentioned, between Interfaith America, Catholic Charities, YMCA, and Habitat for Humanity that really empowers people into the power of connection through service together while leaning into your deep differences and identifying your shared values. There's a saying that we often use at Interfaith America that says, diversity is not only the things that you like, it is also the things that you don't like. So how are you prepared how do you have tools for engaging those differences and to actually collectively creating, and as you said, Ben, co-creating a community that allows for people to come as fully themselves, which enriches everybody's contribution at the table, recognizes everybody's contribution at the table, and really leans into what makes a space of belonging, and asking that question of all of us to come together to create that space.
It's amazing. And this is really culture change. It's a mindset change, which means investments of time, energy, obviously money, and a lot of collaboration. Can you talk a little bit about why it's so important to make that significant of an investment?
Yeah, so this is an investment, I think, on many levels. It's an investment of thinking about ourselves as individuals and the roles that we play in the various spheres of influence that we have, whether that's within our families, whether that's within our job spaces, within our work spaces, whether that's within our communal spaces, our volunteer spaces. And I think it's really important to recognize that many of us are already playing that role, right? Many of us are civic leaders by default. If you are volunteering at your children's school and thinking about parental involvement, you are already in a civic space and engaging that civic space. If you are someone who is active within your local faith institution, you're already active in that civic space. Another aspect of this is the actual financial investment that is needed to do this work. And there are many of us who are either part of corporations who are investing in this work. There's also many of us who are in philanthropy, in family foundations, et cetera, who are investing in this work as well. I know the Team Up Project is extremely lucky and is very grateful for the partnership with Starbucks Foundation, who are not only investing in this work in Team Up, but also are thinking about what it means to create belonging on their own corporation side and with their own employees. So it is important to think of both of those aspects of work, and each of us can do that as a civic leader, and each of us can do that as a leader in the spaces that we have influence.
It has to be intentional. It has to be intentional.
Absolutely.
So belonging is a subject that is part of a lot of conversations here in the US, and that's certainly going to increase, I think, with the Belonging Begins With Us campaign. So we're grateful that you are running this. But we're also grateful to have Kath with us to share another perspective from outside of the US. Kath, can you talk a little bit about how belonging is thought of in Hong Kong?
Yes, thanks, Diane. And first, I just wanted to say, huge gratitude to Points of Light for making it possible for us to be here. Like, me and my team have come from Hong Kong. We've come a really long way, and that is completely thanks to the support of Points of Light. I feel really honored to be able to share our work in Hong Kong. And there are so many other global affiliates here doing amazing work, and I want to invite them to stand up. Again, stand up, come from Brazil, from Poland, from Japan, from the Philippines, from Mexico. So just Yeah, so it feels like an honor to be able to do that, and I would like to be able to show you what it looks like, the work we're doing in Hong Kong. So thank you for playing our video.
There are so many things that when you're running a charity you have to do alone, but finding volunteers is not one of those things because of Hands on Hong Kong.
It gives me immense satisfaction, something to give back to the society.
Well, I think volunteering gives me a purpose in the community, and Feeding Hong Kong is just one of the many charities that I help out through Hands on Hong Kong.
By helping us to mobilise volunteers, Hands on Hong Kong are making a very real difference in the lives of those people, because those volunteers are helping us to collect food, to sort food, to pack food, and to ensure that it is going to help those that need it the most.
People who need help and people can offer help, they can be matched through this platform, and we can help the city to be better together.
回想起我哋同 Hands On 有大概7年合作 ，Hands On 會有一啲可能實質嘅義工啦，提供義工服務俾我哋啦，喺人力嘅支援上有幫到我哋手啦。另一樣咧，喺唔同嘅活動上，亦都有一啲資助俾我哋咧，可以讓我哋同學仔有更多嘅嘗試啦，嘗試更加多唔同嘅活動啦。同時間 Hands On 能夠有一個好 flexible 嘅回應啦，咁所以呢個係我覺得喺唔同單位或者唔同機構裏邊咧 ，Hands On 一個特點嚟嘅。
A lot of people just view volunteering as giving away something, maybe your time, maybe your money, maybe your energy, but you don't just give away something, you have something to take away.
除咗係幫我哋咧係提供一啲義工服務之外咧，佢哋係幫我哋咧提供一啲嘅資源嘅配對啦，咁亦都係幫我哋咧喺社區上邊咧去宣傳啦。喺嗰個義工同埋我哋啲長者咧喺互動嗰個過程入邊咧，可以令到啲義工咧去了解多啲長者嗰個特性嘅。
It definitely helps me understand a lot more of the struggles that the society has, especially those who come from not so fortunate backgrounds, and that really shapes me as a person.
Thank you. I know it's not a short video, but I know a lot of it resonates so much with the work that you're all doing. So, you know, everywhere has its unique challenges, and I'm sure you guys will have heard the social unrest we had in 2019, people's ability to use their voice freely. We had the most protracted COVID response that the world had seen, families torn apart. So there's hopelessness, fragmentation, disconnection, and that's all the antithesis of belonging. So, you know, through what we do, we just want to make volunteering really accessible. We want to make it really easy. We want to make it almost frictionless. So, the hub, our website, which many of you operate in this way, we let people choose their cause, choose by availability, choose by your passion. Give it a go, experiment. You don't have to get it right the first time. We don't build in a lot of repeat commitments. We know once you make that first step, our research has shown the chances are 2 and 3 that you will continue. So we just believe everyone deserves to live a significant life. And the best way to do that is to connect with your community.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kath. And I think that leads perfectly into where we're going to pivot to a little bit to safe spaces. Like, that's what you're creating, is the opportunity for people to find the place where they feel safe, where they feel like they belong. We're in a time of deep polarization in this country, certainly, and I think in many, many other places, and people are sometimes nervous about having difficult conversations. I think we've all seen, witnessed, maybe experienced personally that social media really amplified a lasting impact of what was called cancel culture, even though you don't hear that term as much anymore. So I'd love to hear from each of you about creating a safe place to have those difficult conversations without that fear of what might happen if I ask a question that may feel wrong. So Jenan, we'll start with you.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for that. I'm actually going to share a quick story from my travel here to this conference. So I was on a plane coming from Chicago to Houston, and there was a very lovely Texan grandma sitting next to me on the plane, and we were trying to save the seat between us. We were on Southwest, so you can pick your seats.
Everyone knows that experience.
Right. So we're strategizing, how to be comfortable. And in that moment, sort of had a conversation really quickly as people were still filtering into the plane, where she was asking me where I was from, I was asking her where she was from, and having this quick exchange of just where we were and what we were doing. And in that moment, she was like, how long are you going to be in Texas? And I was like, well, I'm just going to be there for 24 hours because my dad is actually currently in the hospital, so I have to cut my trip short. So she was like, well, I'm sorry to hear that. And then we kind of sat through that plane ride, which was about 2.5 hours. And when we landed, I sort of got up to grab my bags, and she kind of called out to me. We did not succeed in saving the seat between us. She kind of called out to me and said, hey, what's your daddy's name? I'm going to add him to my prayer list. And it was a really beautiful moment, but it was also a moment where it was not lost on me as I was preparing to be here, thinking about, she and I probably have a lot of deep differences. We probably have a lot of disagreements on lots of things, religious, political, and otherwise. But the fact that we're able to have that exchange shows the power of connection even in deep polarizing times, right? We are not going to be in a space where deep difference is not part of the conversation. To pretend like it is not part of the conversation is to our detriment. Because when we ignore the elephant in the room, then when the elephant becomes very visible and unable to ignore, then that fractures the space that you've created, because you have not given the people the tools to actually sit and grapple with that disagreement. And I think that's where this conversation is really important. There's a poem that I often use by the American poet Edwin Markham, who said, "He drew a circle that drew me out, heretic rebel, a thing to flout. But love and I had the wit to win. We drew a circle that drew him in." And it's really about how can we draw those circles expansively, recognizing that we are going to have some difficult and wrestle with some really hard things, and to not walk away from that in moments when it gets really difficult.
Yeah. Thank you. Kath?
Yeah, the idea of safe spaces and open conversations really resonates. And I'll share that, in Hong Kong as a culture, we really avoid difficult conversations. It's actually quite impolite to challenge others. And so sort of conflict avoidant, I think quite deferential. So in school, you will do what your teacher tells you. You will do what your boss tells you. And the hierarchy is quite like that. So how we come at our sense of belonging in our community is it is always an invitation. No one is ever going to force you to volunteer. You're invited to join. Everyone's invited to join. And when we do, we do a lot of, as well as the volunteering, we do a lot of talks, town halls and at schools and at universities and at the beginning of a program. We'll always start with why. Why are we doing this? What is the need that we're seeing? We know you can handle it. And we believe fundamentally that everybody wants to make a difference. We really believe in the good of humanity. So we're not there sort of peddling in negativity. And I like to say a lot, you can show up and you can think, whether it's your company or it's your school, I've got to do this. I've got to do this. My teacher told me I've got to do this. And we're always like, you get to do this. You get to get closer to your community and understand what's happening and help. And I find that inviting people and inspiring people and moving people is often powerful enough. And then once you're in the door, you are there with people who might have nothing in common with you, but you all chose to be there.
Yeah, that's great. So there's an elephant in the room, there's hierarchies, there's politeness and formalities. Ben, how do you work with those things that exist and have good conversations, productive conversations?
Yeah, I think one good response is to use the practice of the pause. Because I think when we come to engagements with people across difference, we're assuming that we know what people think, what they believe, what their response is going to be. And so as much as we're able to pause ourselves, there's a wonderful concept in a book written by a fantastic intellectual and brother named Dr. Sean Jenright called The Four Pivots. And he talks about how we enter scenarios with each other, particularly when we're trying to solve problems, and we bring our lens. And he says what we need to do is move away from the lens and move to a mirror. Let me start thinking about myself and saying, why is it that I feel the way that I feel about this engagement, about this person, and then how can I practice curiosity rather than judgment? And my instincts may have been correct, but they also might not be correct. And I found that when I was doing work with law enforcement at the table, sitting down there could be police at the table and myself at the table. I've had a great uncle who was unfortunately lynched in North Carolina years ago, reported to be off-duty police officer. So I had every reason in the world to have a lot of suspicion at the table. But what I didn't recognize is that the police officer that was sitting down at the table also had his sibling, his big brother, killed at the high school, the first juvenile murder in the city of Oakland on a campus. So we both were entering the conversation with violence and homicide on the table, and we needed to pause to see one another before just saying, you're a community person and I'm law enforcement. So I think the invitation is pause, get curious, move from lens to mirror, because I think then we find the opportunity, if it's there, to really start building the bridge.
Yeah. Thank you.
Our founder, Ibu Patel, wrote a book called We Need to Build about a year ago, and in it he says something that's really resonating with what both of you are saying, which is push back on the things that you do not love by building the things that you do.
Yeah.
So fight the things that you do not love by building the things that you do. And I think what you were talking about, Kat, is exactly that, right? Like, you're creating a space that you have a vision for, and you're creating that space where people are able to come into that space and interact with that space with that belonging,
and be
in ways that
themselves.
you're defining as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think the critical need for this kind of intentionality around belonging and creating safe spaces, it probably, and we say this phrase a lot in a lot of different settings, but it's because it resonates. It's more important than ever, right? It feels urgent. We know, and we've been talking about this, I'm sure, in a lot of the sessions this week, that all of our communities are really threatened by complex and urgent challenges that have persisted for a really long time. At the same time, we feel this disconnection, we feel isolation, and those things undermine our efforts to actually rally people to help address these deep-rooted problems. And we all know in this room, this is why we're here, that volunteers are essential to meeting critical needs that we're trying to address in our communities. So I wanted to put that lens, but also a mirror, I think, Ben, on that, and just talk a little bit about what are the ways that volunteering addresses the issue of polarization and bias and is the antithesis of belonging, and how nonprofits, how our organizations that are doing this work can effectively create one-on-one conversations, but on scale, because that's what we need, to repair communities, that torn social fabric, that just sense of disconnection, and really create a sense of belonging for everybody. And Ben, I'll start with you.
Yeah, well, I think we fear people because we don't know people. and we don't know people because we're not close to people. And so I think one of the opportunities that volunteerism creates is it gives us a practice to close our proximity to people who are different from us. And by closing our proximity, getting a little bit closer, I'm gonna have the opportunity to really learn about a different way that human beings are facing a problem, facing a challenge. And I'm gonna get to understand those folks better, which is going to help to mitigate some of the bias or fears or mistrust that I might have about people across difference. And so I think, finding a way to step into those spaces while also keeping in mind, right, that if you show up at a place to volunteer or to lean into someone else's story, 80% of what's happening there, you probably will disagree with, right? You're not gonna like how the meeting runs, you're not gonna appreciate the conversation, but rather than focusing on the 80% that's different, focus on the 20% that's similar. And volunteerism gives us an opportunity to recognize our common connections and start building from there. As you were saying, it never dissipates or disappears our difference, but hopefully volunteerism can invite us into a place to get curious about our differences and even to see the beauty of our differences without needing to somehow escape them or change them.
Yeah, and Ben, you said something earlier that I would love for you to talk about here, and that was creating a bigger table.
Yeah, well, I think the hard part with, making those pieces happen, I ran into this in my own life before. When we were trying to do the gun violence work, I was trying to figure out how do I get all of these volunteers to sit at the table? The law enforcement, the people who were shooting at folks in the community, the mothers whose children were being shot at or had been killed, community members, people of different religions, et cetera. It was just frustrating me, and I remember talking to John Powell, and I said, I'm trying to figure out how to create belonging, but how do I get everybody to sit at this table? They don't fit. And Dr. Powell looked at me and he said, well, Ben, build a bigger table. And I think sometimes, if not careful, the temptation is to try to fit everybody at a small table instead of building a bigger table that has space for everyone to fit. And I think that's where the co-creation invitation is really powerful.
Yeah, thank you. And I think volunteering does that, right? It starts almost with a bigger table. Thank you. Jenan.
I'll start with another story here. So on October 7th, I was on my way home from a work travel trip, and the news of what was happening in Israel-Palestine sort of came across my phone screen. And in that moment, as somebody who is Muslim, as someone who has Palestinian children, I myself am not Palestinian, but my children are part Palestinian, was wondering and could see what was coming, what was about to come at us, right? The first phone calls that I made, or the first text messages that I sent out, were to my Jewish colleagues who have both familial connections to Israel, but also religious ones, and just to say, are you okay? Like, what is happening is terrible, it is awful, are you okay? Is your family okay? And then the second thing that I did was to text my 13-year-old to be like, when I get home, we should talk before you go to school on Monday. Mm-hmm. And when I was driving my 13-year-old to school that Monday morning, we were having a conversation about what he might encounter in his social studies class, where they watch CNN newsreels at the end of every social studies class hour. And as we were having this conversation, he said to me, "It's okay, Mama, I'm used to the racism. I got it. It's okay." Mm. And first of all, that's something that a mother never wants to hear, ever. And second of all, it was the proof in the pudding that the elephant is always in the room. It is always in the room, whether you acknowledge it or not, right? So in that moment for me, as someone who's a practitioner of this work, I was really thinking about where are the bright spots? Where do we see people who are able to do this work, even in the most difficult of circumstances, right? There's an organization here in Texas called the Minaret Foundation that is doing a project called Sacred Ballots. It's nonpartisan. It's basically empowering faith communities to be polling sites for the upcoming election year and to be serving and being part of the democratic process. Whether you are Jewish, Muslim, Buddhist, however you may identify that your community should be engaged in this democratic process and has a place at the table. And let's do that together even if we have disagreements politically about who we vote for, right? So that's a really important bright spot. Another, on a campus context, is I know that we have been watching, all of us have been watching the mayhem that has been happening on campuses across the country. And one of the things that gives me hope in this moment is when those acts are also showing belonging in moments where you don't quite think that they're going to be there. So for example, as the protests were taking rise at the UCLA campus, and there was a violent counter-protest that came in from the outside of the university, and there was lots of violence, the Jewish students at the Hillel at UCLA wrote a letter to their community saying, we may have deep disagreements with the pro-Palestinian students who are protesting, but we do not condone the violence against their protest. And it is important to recognize that they have a right to protest as Americans on this campus, nonviolent protest as Americans, right? Another example is the Hillel at Miami University was reading the names of Holocaust victims for their annual Holocaust Remembrance program. And in the midst of that, a woman stood up and screamed and shouted, "Are you going to also read the names of 40,000 Gazans?" And in that moment, a leader from their local chapter of the Students for Justice in Palestine stood up and said, "Don't do that. This is a sacred space to recognize the atrocities of the Holocaust. We may have deep disagreements on Israel and Palestine, but we do not disrupt this space." And it's important to see those examples and be able to tell those stories, because the conversation will always be divisive if we don't have ways to show that we are able to disagree and hold to our values that are so important to us, and at the same time see the humanity of the other side. And that's something that we need to practice more.
Absolutely, and I think it's similar to what you said, Ben, about looking for the 20% where there's similarities. There is it's very easy to slip into the darkness of all of the negativity and the debate and the disagreement. But it is always going to exist, and so we have to look for, and hopefully it's more than 20%, but where are those bright spots that can help us find models, help us have some hope to keep doing the work going forward, and just know that we can make change in small incremental ways if we're very intentional about it. Kath.
So I'd love to take this question and sort of look at it from another point. So, you know, we need to address these issues through belonging, but where are the people that should be volunteering and they're not volunteering? Because we're talking about the crisis, right? We've been talking about that a lot. So we look at, you know, in Hong Kong, 90%, the employment rate in Hong Kong is 97%. Wow. It's very high. In the US, apparently it's 60, but it's still, a lot of people experience their lives at work, you know, once they finish schooling. So they expect, we were in a session, an interesting session this morning about Gen Z, that people expect to have their purpose harnessed through work, and these coming generations, they want to give back, and often they just need to be invited. They just need to be asked. So I think, you know, a lot of the affiliates in the room like us, we do work with companies to empower their volunteers, and that's kind of a fee-for-service way. But I have to say at Hands on Hong Kong, we've been trying to take it that step further and almost become like social impact consultants to these companies, the ones that run programs with us and the ones that don't. And I would say, could you put your hand up if you're a CSR practitioner in a company here?
Got a few.
Yeah, like, and I know you guys all want to do such amazing work, and I know you guys are all under-resourced and stretched as well, just like the charities are. So, you know, we sit down and we have conversations, and this is all about thriving, right? This is all about belonging, and I just think if you thrive in the place where you spend most of your life, you are going to have more abundance and energy to give back to the community. So we are talking to our partners like, do you give time off to volunteer? If you do give time off to volunteer, often people aren't using it. How can we help you to do that? How can we be sharing calendars like ours and getting people to take that up? Empowering your teams to choose their own cause areas, letting people vote about the things that they care about. A lot of companies have donation matching, and people don't even know about it. So there is so much that can be unpacked and built upon within people's working lives where they are already spending time, awarding their efforts for volunteering. Another sort of, I know this is getting practical, but I think it's really relevant because we know that, again, companies are hurting on the funding side just like charities are. Like we are seeing CSR and philanthropy budgets being pulled back, but we're actually working with our partners to see volunteering is so important, we can carve out a case for that through people development, team building. We're actually seeing companies even say, let's make our client entertainment service-based. Let's use it as learning. Let's use it as HR. Like now when we run a program with companies, we actually do a poll of people immediately to see what was their sense of belonging with that program. Like what did they learn? What are they going to do differently? So I just think there is this huge case for us to really be cross-sector in the way that we're fostering belonging. And again, more people thriving is more people getting engaged.
Using the places where people are. It's that old phrase, meet people where they are. And they're at work, we're at work a lot. I think we can all agree on that. So we would normally start a conversation like this by talking about why, what's the purpose, but I saved this one for the end so that we can really end, I think, on a beautiful vision, which I know you are all gonna articulate. So what would the world look like by practicing acts of belonging if we're intentional and we all end up feeling like we belong in whatever the situation or circumstance that we are in is? Why? What's the purpose? What would that look like? Jenan, I'll start with you.
Sure. There's a couplet by the Chicago poet Gwendolyn Brooks who writes, "True, there is silver under the veils of darkness, but very few care to dig in the night for the possible treasure of stars." And in a lot of ways, the work of creating belonging is digging in the darkness for the possible treasure of stars. And the hope is that when you find those constellations, they give you the pathway to create that community, right? At Interfaith America, we have this vision about America being this expansive potluck table. And potluck may sound very Pollyanna, very Midwestern, but it's really about everyone being able to bring their best dish to the table, whatever that may be. And it's understanding that the table has to be big enough to account for religious practices and restrictions. The table has to be big enough to account for taste preferences. The table has to be big enough to account for allergies. But when you bring your best dish to the table and you're able to present that, you come in with pride, you come in with agency, you come in with ownership, and you come in to share that with the rest of the table who is also coming in with those aspects. And then you're able to have this conversation and have this meal that is beautiful, and at the same time is sitting in the reality of not everyone can maybe access all of those dishes, but how do you make sure that everyone is able to access all of the dishes, and it is their choice and their, agency that they will engage with. And I think that's something that we are hoping will happen and are working towards, is creating this humongous table where everyone brings their best dish and is able to share that with everyone else.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Kat?
I don't know if this might sound like a little bit corny, but I kind of feel like it would look like this room. Really? Like this room, I don't know how many backgrounds and nationalities and races and religions, but like whenever I come to these gatherings, I'm like, I am with my tribe. And what do we have in spades? Like, I mean, I know we all, the missions, the work, the causes, but I just think like the hope, the positivity, and I really believe that the passion that we have for our work is contagious. It's contagious in the best possible way, not in an epidemic way. And if we just keep giving and sharing and doing what we're doing and inviting, then I think we're all making the world a better place every day. So I just think we all need to just keep doing what we're doing.
Thank you, Kath. Ben?
When I think of a new world, I would just plus one on everything you all said. I love this image of the potluck and everyone being able to bring their own dish. And when I think of that new world, it's similar to that potluck where not only do you get to bring your new dish, but everyone gets to come to the potluck. And although we all get to come, we also all don't have to sit next to each other. So that there's space enough for people that want to scream and yell. Next to some of us, I'm a little bit more introverted, who want to be quiet on the back end. Yeah. It's a circle of human concern that's big enough for all of us that doesn't require us to become each other in order to participate in the circle. And so I really believe that what we need in order to get here is we need a spiritual revolution, not a religious one, but we need a spiritual revolution. I love this point around values, right? Because I think what's pulling us away from each other sometimes gets talked about like it's just a political reality. But I actually think we have a spiritual crisis in the sense that we have lost our ability to hold on to the connection to each other across difference. To me, a new world is when we can hold on to our connection amidst the difference. And the political realities and the structural realities will never go away with just political and structural solutions, but they can be addressed through a spiritual revolution. So I'm hoping we can find a way to be at that potluck with room for all of us to sit and enjoy and flourish.
Yeah. Thank you. I just have to say, and I think on behalf of the room, just a big set of gratitude for each of you for the work that you're doing, the insights that you brought. None of this work is easy. If it was easy, we would be done, right? We would retire, we'd be done. Check, it's over. But it's important, it's critical for our families, our communities, our countries, our society to thrive, to heal and thrive, and be the beautiful world that each of you described. And it takes a lot of difficult work, and some folks heard me say this yesterday, but I'll say it again, but imagine if it's even better than we thought. So yes, there's a lot of what ifs and things that could go wrong. We'll tackle them, and imagine if it's better than what even you described. It's going to be a place where everyone can thrive. So thank you for your time, for making the effort to come to us at our conference and join us, and we're so grateful for you. Thank you.
Thank you.